Alright, let's do plugs and wires on this 3000 GT. Unfortunately, the hood struts are weak. So we're going to start by replacing these hood struts here, and I'll walk you through it. So it's a couple of 10 millimeters. And let's get started here. Probably one of the easiest things you can do to your 3000 GT is replace your hood struts. So many of these I see need a prop rod, like you can see in the video, to where this isn't a very long job. I'm speeding this up so you can see the install, but it's literally two 10 millimeter bolts, and then you clip it in on the side. Of course, a lot of these aftermarket struts will come with a new strut to put into place. So here you can see I've supported the hood. I remove the bolt in the hood, then remove the strut, make sure it matches, bolt the new one in, and you're all set to go. It's a very, very simple process, and it really just makes working on the car that much easier. Now that the hood struts are fixed, I can actually pull the front plugs and see what this thing needs. These are all 10 millimeters. You just want to pull them out. Stay organized. That's my biggest advice on working on any of these cars. There's a lot of bolts and pieces here. Should be a 5/8 plug to pull them out, and these plugs, as you can see, are toast. There's oil contamination in here. So this video is actually going to turn into a spark plug service plus valve cover service, and I'll put marks as to what we got going on, but here you can see I've got them all pulled apart. And we're going to get going on the next step here. Probably should have started with this step here of actually undoing the battery. So of course, negative first, then the positive, then the battery bracket. This should all be 10 millimeters if none of it's been changed. And the bracket has a J hook in the bottom. You get the battery out of the place. Now we're actually going to see other things you should be inspecting. This has got a torn hose, and you saw that there. So next up, I usually pull the Y pipe again. Make sure that the grommet inside the Y pipe is there. Again, should be all 10 mils. And you see I'm labeling stuff. I know these cars backwards and forwards, but I'm still going to label where the vacuum lines go just to make sure. Also, fill all your voids with rags. These are all 10 millimeters on the top, and it's 12 millimeters to hold the intake manifold down, but I'm just removing the throttle cable here, a couple of 10 millimeters, and it pops out. Then it's going to be removing brackets along the back side, as well as hose connections, making sure everything's removed and unplugged. Fiddling with throttle body next. I'll typically unbolt the throttle body, move it out of the way. Now you don't have to disconnect the coolant lines. You can just move it out of the way there, as you can see. Now to the back side here, I usually remove the rear turbo outlet pipe for the intercooler system next. Again, it's a 12 millimeter and an O-ring that holds it into the outlet, then a 10 millimeter on the hose clamp. Fill all your holes again. Now we're going to be working on the next step of the process of removing the intake manifold brackets so we can get the manifold off. You want to make sure everything's removed from the back. There's a couple of bolts from the intake manifold stays into the upper intake manifold. Now there's a specific torque sequence to removing the upper to the lowers, and I just usually reverse that when I'm pulling it apart. There's not a lot of torque here. It's 10 to 13 foot-pounds to mate the upper and lower, so it shouldn't take a lot of effort to remove it. Just make sure you're keeping track of where all the bolts go. There's two long ones in the middle, short ones in the front, and then there's actually studs on the outside edges here. I'd forgotten to actually disconnect one last vacuum line, so we're good there. Everything's organized. There's your access point. Now we're just removing the rear spark plugs. Pretty easy to do. Again, I'm just going to check them as I pull them out, and they're really in the same condition as the front. Rich, oil soaked. Both valve covers are leaking. Now, if you are just doing plugs and wires, this would be your next step. Now, I put a little bit of anti-seize on every single plug when I put them in, and I'm just threading them into place, torquing them down. It's a crush washer, standard issue, 1/2 or 3/4 turn. And since I'm doing valve covers, it makes sense to plug these holes with spark plugs anyway. So that way when I'm scraping all the silicone off, those holes are filled and I can just blow them out with compressed air. So we're just going to put the spark plugs in the front here, and then we're going to move on to the next part of the job. To do the front valve cover, of course, you need to remove the timing belt cover first. So it's a couple of 10 millimeters, and remove the front timing belt cover. You want to undo that AC line, which is a 12. So here you're pulling the front valve cover off. All these bolts are the same, and I forgot that when I originally started pulling this apart and removing the PCV valve there, and I actually pulled them all out and then put them in a piece of cardboard so they went back in the exact same spot as you can see here. This is unnecessary because all the valve cover bolts or cam cover bolts are all the same length on the front and on the rear except for one, so you don't actually have to do this step here where I'm laying them all out. But if it's something you've never pulled apart, this is a best practice. I know when I did the water pump on my Ram, the water pump bolt, every single one was different, so I'm really glad I used this process. And if it's something I don't recall or don't remember or don't have the book in front of me, I'll just quickly lay it out as I did here. Now this valve cover, if you can see, is just coated in the red high temp RTV. You don't need this much in these valve covers. Service manual calls for a little bit in the cam tower cap corners, and that's it. I will put a little bit of black RTV on the valve cover to hold the gasket in place only, but you can see this is going to take me a tremendous amount of time to clean up this valve cover. In fact, it took over an hour per head to clean off all the RTV on the head and on the valve covers. Here I'm just working my way all the way around this valve cover with a razor blade and a pick to pull all the RTV out of it. And this is a very tedious but important process. Now, you can see the oil stains on this valve cover. Not ideal. Ideally, it would be more of a golden color. It just means that oil changes have been a little bit further apart than I would have liked to seen. That being said, it happens. I would not spend too much time cleaning the valve cover. You don't want to dislodge a bunch of carbon and have it in the engine, but here we are in the engine bay, and we're going to actually start doing all the cleaning as well. I'm going to be doing a pick to get the corners and then just running around all the outside with a gasket scraper. Alright, we're all cleaned up and ready to go, and here you can see the valve cover's got the gasket installed with a little bit of RTV to hold it in place. Now let's actually install it here. I'm going to use ultra black, and what we're doing here is we're putting a little bit of RTV sealant in all four corners in the cam cap towers. This is actually in the service manual as well, and this is the only place you need RTV on these valve cover gaskets. So here you can see where I've got a little bit of RTV right there on the valve cover. And you can see where I've got the RTV on the cam caps right there in the corners there. You want about a ½ an inch or so overlay, and I will actually smooth this out here in a second. And first we'll put the gasket down in the valve cover, and then we'll put the valve cover on the head. Here I'm placing all the bolts back in the respective holes and spinning them down by hand, and I'll actually do a final torque. Unfortunately, I had a camera malfunction, so you won't be able to see me torque this down, but essentially I put the bolts down into place, then run around and torque them in spec, put the front plugs back in, and then we'll pick up where the rear is. Here is where you place the sealant. There's the torque pattern for the front and rear valve cover, and there's the torque spec, and it's a two-step process. Unfortunately, I had a camera malfunction here, so you didn't get to see the rear valve cover job. It does come off with the intake manifold stays, and it's the same process as the front. Just clean it up, follow the torque sequences as previously shown in this video, and you'll be fine. Don't overdo it with the RTV. Here I'm threading in the new spark plug wires and threading the old ones out. Now I do try to make sure these route the same way as factory, using all the factory clips and containers and whatnot. Now it's pretty simple. The coils themselves are marked 1 through 6, and it does show the firing order. Again, you can see I'm putting a little dielectric grease on the end of the spark plug cables just to make sure that I've got a good connection. I also put it on the boot side here. We'll snap them down into place. Now it's time to put the upper intake manifold in. I'm using new gaskets here, Felpro gasket, and I'm actually going to reuse the throttle body gasket, but Felpro includes a metal gasket, which is nice. And again, remove everything, make sure it's all clean, wiping down the surfaces, and we'll just get the manifold in place. Now I put the bracket stays in and the front bolts in all at the same time, and hand put them in first. I do not torque the fronts down until the rear bracket stay bolts are in place. That way it's all connected and good to go. Here I'm putting the rear bracket stays in, and I'm going to be torquing it all down to the 11 to 13 foot-pounds. Now the rest of it is just really a reverse of disassembly. Put the spark plug wiring down, put the rear intercooler piping in place, connect everything, connect the throttle bodies. It's pretty simple here, and when you're done you'll end up with something very similar to what we've got. Now what I'm doing here is I'm actually adding new silicone vacuum line to replace those lines I pointed out at the beginning of the video. Anytime I'm working on a throttle body, I do recommend replacing the lines, even if you're not doing an emissions delete, just to fix it up. Now the battery goes in and we're pretty much set and all ready to go. Final photo here. We're all set and ready to go. Car fires right up and runs perfectly. When in doubt, take photos, label, follow the torque specs, and take your time. You can do this. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.